Karan Xingyan squatted in the muddy alley, holding a broken cloth in his hand, wiping half of the black bread that had just been stolen from the market. He was hungry like a wild beast, roaring in his stomach, but he didn't dare to eat too much, for fear that this food would not last tomorrow. The small town on the border of Elsaris mainland is no longer a good place, especially to a father-free orphan. Every street in this place is like a wolf's mouth, waiting to devour people like him. The sky was dark and the clouds were pressing low, as if they were going to smash them down at any time. Karan raised his head and muttered, "It's going to rain again, it's going to be dead." He stuffed the bread into a broken burlap bag, tilted his shoulders and dripped into the alley deep in the alley, looking for a corner that could shelter from the rain. He was only 14 years old, as thin as a bamboo pole. His face was always dirty, but his eyes were so bright that it seemed as if he was hiding something unclear. The air in the alley is damp and fishy, mixed with the smell of vegetable leaves and water rinds. Karan sat down against a broken wall, bit the bread, and heard a rapid sound of footsteps coming from afar. He immediately became alert and hid the bread in it and shrank it into the shadow. There are gangsters everywhere in the town. The things that are snatching are no different from trampling on them. As his footsteps grew closer, Karan held his breath and glanced through the gaps in the corner of the wall. The one who came was an old woman wearing a long gray robe, a shattered scarf wrapped around her head, and a bent wooden stick in her hand, looking like a beggar. But her eyes were as sharp as a knife. When she swept through the alley, Karan felt inexplicably nervous, as if she was being targeted by something. "Come out, little devil." The old woman's voice was so powerful that it could penetrate the wall. Karan was frightened and almost bit her tongue. He didn't move, wondering how could this old woman find out about herself. But the next second, the wooden stick hit the wall with a bang, making his ears buzz. "I don't have the patience to waste your time with you, little devil. Come out, otherwise I will demolish your broken alley." The old woman's voice was not a joke. Karan gritted his teeth, slowly stood up from the shadow, holding the bread in his hand, and was ready to run away at any time. He looked up and down at the old woman and tried to ask, "Who are you? Are you looking for me? I didn't steal your stuff." The old woman hummed, ignored his problem, but stared at him with her double-handed eyes, making Karan feel uncomfortable. After a while, she opened her mouth. "You are Karan, right? Karan Starflame." Karan was stunned for a moment, and his heart skipped a beat. He chose this name himself, and Xingyan was written by him because he thought it sounded cool. But no one knows this name except himself, let alone an old woman I have never seen before. He raised his eyebrows and stepped back vigilantly. "How do you know my name?" The old woman didn't answer, but took out a piece of stone the size of a palm from her robe, which was engraved with runes that she couldn't understand, and there was still soil on the edge, which looked like she had just dug out from the ground. She put the stone slab in front of Karan, and said in a low voice, "Have you seen this?" Karan glanced at him and shook his head. "I haven't seen it." "Who are you? If you say, don't complain to me." He was so tough that he felt a little tired in his heart. Although the stone piece looked inconspicuous, he didn't know why. When he saw the runes on it, his heart beat a little fast, as if he had heard something low in his brain. The old woman narrowed her eyes, as if she was weighing his reaction. After meeting, she said quietly, "My name is Ethelyn, and I am a guardian. You can call me an old man. I look for you because you have something in you, which is a very old story. It is older than this world." Karan heard a fog and couldn't help rolling his eyes. "What's the matter? Tell me." "I'm just an orphan, and I have nothing but a few pieces of rags and half a bread on my body. Are you looking for someone wrong?" Atharine ignored his ridicule and just used a wooden stick to draw a circle on the ground, chanting some words that she couldn't understand in her mouth. Karan was about to open his mouth to complain, but suddenly felt his wrist hot. When he looked down, he found that there was a faint mark on the back of his hand, like a group of burning flame patterns, illuminating invisibly. He almost jumped up and quickly wiped it with his other hand, but the mark seemed to be growing in his skin and could not be erased. "What's this, a ghost thing?" Karan stared at Ethelyn, his voice trembling. "What did you fuck me?" Ethelyn raised her head, with a complex look in her eyes, "This is not what I did. This is your blood, the blood of the Creator God. It is awakening." Kalan stood there in a blank space in his brain. The creation God? Bloody? These words are no different from Tianshu to him. He only knew that he was an orphan who had been living in a limestone town. His biggest dream was to steal money, leave this ghost place, and go to a big city to have a meal. But now this old woman told him what kind of creation God he has to do with. This sounds like a joke. Are you crazy?" Kalan said for a long time, and his voice was filled with suspicion. "I don't know who my father and mother are. What's the blood? Don't use me to open it. I still have to find a place to hide from the rain." Atharine was not angry, but just snatched her head. Her lingering and calming language carried an unquestionable majesty. "It's okay if you don't believe it, but you can't escape it. This vast land, Elsaris, was destined to be destroyed from the beginning of the world. The gods fell, the myths were scattered among people, and the power hidden in it could save the world and destroy it. And you, Kalan Starflame, are the only one who can unravel these gangs." Kalan heard the numbness of his head and couldn't help but step back 2 steps. "Me? What do I understand? I don't know where I will be next. You can find someone else, I'm not interested in being a savior." But Atharine didn't give him the chance to refuse. She lifted the wooden stick and slammed it lightly. The air in the alley suddenly became heavy, and Kalan felt that an invisible force was pressing him into motion. He widened his eyes in shock and heard Ethelyn whisper, "You don't have to choose, child. Fate has come to you." At this moment, a deep roar suddenly came from the entrance of the alley, as if some wild beast was roaring. Kalan turned his head and saw only a few black shadows walking out of the shadow, with a creepy breath radiating from his body. They were wearing ragged cloaks and covered with cloth on their faces, but their eyes were flashing with strange red light and their hands were approaching step by step with raw iron blades. "Ancient vocabulary, you shouldn't be here." The dark shadow in the head opened his mouth, the sound seemed to be crawling out from the ground, and the sand was cold again. "Take that kid out, otherwise we don't mind burning this broken town to ashes." Ethelyn's face darkened, she held the wooden stick tightly, and said to Kalan in a low voice, "Stand behind me and don't be upset." Although Kalan was full of heart, looking at this strategist, he knew that now was not the time to be weak. He gritted his teeth and hid behind Ethelyn, and couldn't help but sneer in his heart, "What's the matter?" Ethelyn stopped talking. As soon as the wooden stick was blown, the ground suddenly trembled, and a few rays of light spread out from under her feet, like a net, covering the black shadows. But those guys seemed to have been ready. The black shadow in the head sneered, and with a slight snarl, a group of black fogs instantly swept towards Ethelyn. 2 forces collided in midair, making a harsh sound. Kalan watched all this and his brain became a group. He didn't know who these people were, nor what Atharine was coming, but he could feel that fighting was absolutely nothing. The flame pattern on the back of his hand became more and more intense. He bit his teeth and forced himself to calm down. He suddenly heard Atharine sniff, "Run. Run out of the town. Don't turn around." Kalan was stunned for a moment, and without reacting, he was pushed out by a force. He ran out of the alley, his ears still roaring Atharine's voice and the roar of the black shadows. He didn't know where he was going, nor why he wanted to run, but he knew that if he didn't run, he might have lost all his life. The wilderness outside the limestone town was silent, only the sound was heard in my ears. Kalan was running up and couldn't catch up, and finally stopped behind a large stone, and sat down against the stone with a heavy breath. He looked down at the flame pattern on the back of his hand, and his heart was filled with scent. Everything just now seemed like a dream, but the feeling of burning his hands really made him tremble. "What the hell is going on?" he muttered in a low voice, and suddenly heard a sound of footsteps coming from afar. He immediately became alert, narrowed his body, looked through the gaps in the stone, and saw a tall figure walking out of the mist, holding a broken sword in his hand, full of wind, and looking like a wandering trunk. The man seemed to have discovered Kalan, stopped and looked at him, with a low voice, "Hey, little kid, are you hiding there? This wilderness is not a good place." Kalen's heart was tight and he didn't say a word, and his hand was touching a small dagger on his waist. That was what he used to defend himself. Although it was not broken, it could at least give himself some confidence. The man didn't say anything and didn't force him. He just sat down on a dead tree casually, took out a dry water bag, drank a sip of water, and then said to himself, "My name is Ren Broken Blade, and I'm passing this ghost place. Where are you? It doesn't look like you were out for a walk." Kalen hesitated for a moment, and felt that the guy didn't seem to be enemies, so he replied in a low voice, "My name is Kalen. I just ran out of the town and encountered some trouble." Ren raised his eyebrows and looked him up and down, as if he could see something, and pointed it out. "Is it so puzzling? There's so much trouble here. What can you do, a little devil? Whose chicken did you steal?" Kalen was in a state of joking, gritted his teeth and put the flame pattern on the back of his hand in front of Ren. "Have you seen this? I don't know what happened. Someone just said that this is the blood of the Creator God, and then a bunch of people chased me and beat me. If you know what to do, tell me, otherwise don't waste my time." Ren's eyes changed instantly, as if he was stabbed by something. He put down the water bag and looked closer at the pattern, his face becoming unusually serious. After a while, he said in a low voice, "This. I've seen it. It's not in people, but in mythology. Boy, you may have really gotten into marijuana." Kalen felt a sank in his heart. Before he could ask, Ren stood up, glanced around, and said in a low voice, "This place is not safe, we have to leave. Those who pursue you are probably not ordinary people. If I guess it is right, they are He Jing's subordinates." "He Jing? What is that?" Kalen was soaked, but looking at Ren's expression, he knew that this was not a joke. Ren didn't explain much, but just held the sword and signaled Kalen to follow. "Let's go. If you want to survive, don't ask so many questions." Kalen gritted his teeth, and although he was full of doubts, he still followed. The wind in the wilderness became colder and colder, and the clouds in the sky seemed to be filled with anger that would explode at any time. He didn't know why he was rolled into this, nor did he know what was waiting for him, but he could feel that from this moment on his life would never return to the past. Kalen followed Ren through the wilderness. The soil under his feet was moist and soft, and every step he took seemed to be trapped in. The wind shaved even harder, with a biting chill. Kalen shook his neck and couldn't help but whisper, "This place is not a hole to hide from the wind." The flame pattern on the back of his hand was burning from time to time, as if reminding him that nothing was a dream. Ren walked ahead, his steps as stable as a stone, and was not affected by this bad weather. He held the old sword and glanced back at Kalen at any time, as if he was afraid that this little devil would suddenly fall. After he passed the meeting, he finally opened his mouth, his voice as low as thunder. "Boy, do you really don't know what you are?" Kalen rolled his eyes and panted and replied, "What can I know? I am an orphan, grown up in the limestone town. His biggest ability is to steal the bread and not get caught. If you really know what you ordered, don't sell me a secret, you can tell me clearly." Ren hummed and did not rush to answer. Instead, he took out a small leather bag from his waist and threw it to Kalen. "Drink a little water first, don't die of thirst in front of me." Kalen took the leather bag and poured a few sips. The ice-cold water slid down his throat, making him feel a little more energetic. He wiped his mouth, threw the skin back, and asked, "What's the black purity you just said? And what's that myth? What's the relationship with me?" Ren took the skin, hugged it back to his waist, and walked around and said, "Aging is not a thing, but a person, or, to be, no longer human. Have you heard of Valdis Aging? Aging is a descendant of the gods who have some blood ties with the Creator, but he has long gone on a wrong path. He has been looking for myths for the past few years, trying to dig out the power of the taboos in it and destroy the entire Elsaris." Kalen was stunned and his pace slowed down. "Has the whole world been destroyed? Is this guy sick in his brain? Also, what is the god born? Why don't I understand?" Ren glanced at him, and his words were filled with impatient words. "The descendants of the Creator God are descendants of the Creator God, and the blood of God was shed on them. The flame pattern on the back of your hand is a proof. The creator myth says that the 7 creator gods created this vast land, but later they were all lost because of a god war. Their powers were scattered in the destiny, waiting for future generations to inherit, or use them. He Jing wanted to use this power, and you were probably descendants of some creator god, so he sent someone to chase you. Kalan heard his brain buzzing, stopped and stared at Ren. Wait, what kind of god do you mean I am? Isn't that old woman talking nonsense? He lowered his head and looked at the back of his hand. The flame pattern was illuminating in the dim light, and it didn't look like an ordinary scar. He was in a group in his heart, and he was still a tough voice. I don't believe this ghost. I am just an orphan. Where's the divine blood? Ren ignored his stubbornness and just sneered. Believe it or not, but those who pursue you will not tell you the truth. They are He Jing's subordinates, called the Shadow Pupils, who specializes in living for him. If you don't want to die, you'd better keep me in touch. After speaking, he speeded up his pace and walked towards a low hill far away. Kalan gritted his teeth. Although he was full of stomach and questioned, he also knew that it was not the time to be weak. He quickly followed, thinking about what Etherine said in his brain. Creation god, blood, destiny. These words were too far away to him, as far as a joke. But the burning on the back of his hand and the fighting in the alley just now made him admit that all this might be a bit unsimple. After most of the time, the two left, they finally arrived at a broken forest. The trees are sparse, the branches are dry like skulls, and the ground is filled with rotten leaves, emitting a musty smell. Ren stopped, glanced around, and said in a low voice, "We can hide in this place. Let's take a break first and then go to the road tonight." Kalan clicked a little, found a little dry floor and sat down, took out the half of the black bread in it, broke a small piece and stuffed it into his mouth. Ren sat down against a dead tree, took out a whetstone, and began to slowly grind the blade of the big sword, making a harsh rustling sound. Kalan looked at him and couldn't help asking, "Why are you so clear about these things? Do you have a grudge against that He Jing?" Ren's movements were set aside, his eyes darkened, and after a while, he said in a low voice, "My family was once one of the guardians of the myth. A few decades ago, He Jing's subordinates gave us our family to take a piece of waste. I am the only one who survived." He raised his head, with a chill in his eyes. "I have been looking for him for the past few years, looking for opportunities to avenge him." Kalan felt nervous when he heard it, but he didn't expect that Ren had such a thing. He was chewing the bread and was silent for a while before he said in a low voice, "Then why don't you go directly to him? Why are you fucking me with me? I can't help you to take revenge." Ren snorted coldly, "Do you think I want to follow you? But the blood on your body may be the key to finding the truth. I will help you, that is, to myself." He stopped sharpening his knife and stared at Kalan. "Also, who is the old woman named Ethelyn? How do you know her?" Kalan briefly said what happened in the alley just now, mentioning that Ethelyn called himself Ancient Genius and what kind of guardians are. After hearing this, Ren raised his eyebrows and murmured, "The Ancients didn't expect she was still alive. In the story, she was the only one who could understand the chapter of the founding. If she really came to you, then you would be very troubled." "What's the enchanting chapter?" Kalan heard it so hard that he couldn't help but complain, "Why do you say it the same as the real one? How do I think I'm listening to a storybook?" Ren ignored his ridicule and just explained in a low voice, "The creation chapter is a record left by the creation god. It says it is hidden in the deepest part of the myth, and it writes the truth about the demise of God, and there is also a secret that can save the world. But no one knows where it is, and no one can understand it, except for the ancients. If she says you are the key, it is probably true." Kalan heard it half-believingly and was wondering what to ask, but suddenly he heard a low-pitched response from the deep forest, as if something was approaching. He immediately started to warn and asked in a low voice, "Did you hear it?" "What sound?" Ren also heard it and stood up suddenly, his hands tightly clenched. He looked in the direction of the sound, and a low voice said, "Don't make a sound, hide behind me." Kalan didn't say anything, tightened behind Ren, holding the broken dagger in his hand, his heart beating like a drum. After a few seconds, the shrubs in the forest were swept open, and several familiar black shadows walked out. They were still the broken cloak, their eyes were flashing with red light, and the iron blade in their hands was shining with cold light under the dim light. The black shadow in the head sneered and said, "Little devil, you run very fast. Unfortunately, you can't escape." Ren's face darkened and he said to Kaylin in a low voice, "It's a shadow puppet, ready to run. I'll hold them up, go west, don't turn back." Kaylin felt nervous. Although he didn't want to let Ren down, he knew that it was a tiring thing to stay. He gritted his teeth and said, "Be careful." Ren didn't say anything anymore, and took the big sword and went up to meet him. The blade slashed a cold light in the air and headed straight for the black shadow. The other party was not willing to be outdone, and he swung the iron blade and the two of them fought in an instant, making a harsh metal collision sound. Several other dark shadows quickly scattered, and two of them swept towards Kaylin. Kaylin panicked in his heart, turned around and ran away, with a tree root under his feet, almost falling to eat shit. He gritted his teeth and got up, and he kept rushing west without looking back. His ears were filled with the sound of Ren roar and the sound of sword collision. He didn't know how long he had run, but he felt that his lungs were almost blowing up. He finally stopped behind a pile of rocks and hid in with heavy breath. He sat down against the stone, his heart feeling like a numbness. Can Ren hold it? Why did those shadow disciples chase him? And Evelyn, where is she now? A bunch of questions were circulating in his brain, but none of them had an answer. The flame pattern on the back of his hand began to burn again. He looked down and found that the pattern seemed to be clearer than before, as if it had come alive. What is this broken thing? He muttered in a low voice, and suddenly heard a rapid sound of footsteps coming from afar. He was shocked, and he tightened his body and held his breath. The sound of his footsteps got closer and closer, and finally stopped near the pile of stones, and then a familiar voice sounded, "Carlin, it's me." Kaylin was stunned, poked out and found that it was Evelyn. She was still in the gray-clad robe, with a wooden stick in her hand, her face turned paler than before, as if she was injured. Kaylin relaxed his voice, crawled out, and asked in a low voice, "How did you find me? Where are those people?" Evelyn didn't answer directly, but just glanced at him, and said in a low voice, "I used magic to track your blood breath. Those shadow puppies were dispersed by me at a moment, but they will come back soon. We have to leave here quickly and find a safe place." She paused for a moment and asked, "Who is the swordsman who just got you?" Kaylin briefly talks about Ren, mentioning that he is holding the shadow puppet. After hearing this, Evelyn raised his eyebrows. "Ren Blade. The descendants of the Blade family did not expect him to be alive. Since he is willing to help you, let's trust him once. But we can't wait for him, we must leave first." Kaylin felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. Although Ren was not polite, he just realized that he was fighting with the shadows to save him. He hesitated for a moment and asked, "Then what should he do?" "That's how we'll destroy him." Evelyn said coldly, "Since he is from the Blade family, he has the ability to protect himself. The most important thing you are now to survive, otherwise everything will be in vain." She did not give Kaylin the chance to argue, lifted her wooden stick and painted a rune on the ground, recited a few sentences in a low voice, and then a faint light covered them. Kaylin only felt a moment of raze, and then the surrounding scenery began to blur. When he came back to his senses, he realized that he was no longer in the pile of rocks, but was standing in a strange valley. The valley is surrounded by steep stone walls, the bottom of the valley is covered with dense moss, and the air is filled with a damp smell. Kaylin shook his brain and couldn't help asking, "Where is this? What did you fuck?" Atherine stood firmly against the wooden stick, her voice weakly, "This is the Guilt Valley, a place hidden by magic, and the shadows can't find it at all. We are safe, at least now." She stopped, gasped, and then said, "I used a little bit of the sending technique, but I don't have much power anymore and can't be used in a short period of time." Kaylin looked at her white face and felt a little overwhelmed, but she couldn't help but complain, "You old lady, why didn't you tell me this way? It made me run like a dog." Atherine ignored his complaint, but just found a stone head and sat down, took out the stone piece full of runes from her robe, and sent it to Kaylin. "Hold this this is one of the fragments of the creation chapter, which can help you wake up more blood power. Kalan took the stone slabs and bought the ice flakes. The runes on it seemed to be alive, flowing with a glimmer of light. He felt nervous and asked, "Wake up the bloody blood?" "How to wake up? Also, can this thing really help me?" Atharine pointed a little and said, "Your blood is the slightest part of one of the creator gods, the Lord of the Flame Heart, who controls the power of creating and destroying flames. This fragment can guide you and help you control this power. But this process will not be easy, and may even be life-threatening. Are you ready?" Kalan felt her hair growling in her heart, and looked down at the stone tablet without saying a word for a long time. He was a lonely man, from childhood to adulthood, thought about how to survive. How could he have the heart to care about the power of creation and destruction? But now, he doesn't seem to have to choose. Those shadow pupils would not let him go, and Ren and Etherine were also on the hunt to help him. If he escaped, he would even look down on him. Finally, he gritted his teeth, raised his head and said, "Okay, it's all here, I can't always be a bag. I'll do whatever you say." Etherine looked at him, with a little more relief in his eyes, and pointed, "Okay, then we'll start now. You hold the stone, close your eyes, and feel the power inside it. I'll guide you." Kalan did as she said, holding the stones tightly and closing her eyes. At first, he felt nothing, only his palms were sluggish. But after a while, a heat suddenly surged out of the stone slab, rolling into his body with his palms, as if a fire was ignited, making him feel burned. He couldn't help but hum and almost threw the stone into pieces. "Don't let go." Atharine's voice sounded, with unquestionable majesty. "Peace, don't resist this power, it's part of you." Kalan bit her teeth and endured the burning sensation. Some blurry pictures suddenly flashed through her brain. The flames on her edges swallowed the earth. A huge figure stood in the sea of fire, holding a burning spear in her hand, as powerful as it could tear the sky. He didn't know what it was, but he could feel an unprecedented force rushing in his body, like a wild beast that had been sleeping for many years finally woke up. The flame pattern on the back of the hand was dazzlingly bright, and the air around it became hot. Ethelyn looked at all this, with a flash of surprise in her eyes, and murmured in a low voice, "Sure enough, he is the descendant of the Lord of the Fire Heart." At this moment, a deep roar suddenly came from outside the valley, as if something big was approaching. Ethelyn stood up suddenly, holding the tight wooden stick. Her face changed. No, they still found this. Kalan opened her eyes quietly, and her body was still igniting, and she also heard the sound. He stood up, held the stone tablet, and asked in a low voice, "Is it a shadow disciple again?" Atharine shook her head and looked solemn. "No, this time it's something even more numb. Hey Jing's subordinate, Purple. We're ready to fight." She turned to Kalan, with a hurricane in her language. "You just woke up a little bit of strength and tried to use it. If you don't want to die, don't retreat." Kalan felt nervous. Although he didn't know what a purgatory was, looking at Ethelyn's expression, he knew that this thing was definitely not easy to mess with. He lowered his head and looked at the stone in his hand, touched the broken dagger on his waist, gritted his teeth and said, "Okay, fight." The roar outside the valley became closer and closer, and the ground began to shake slightly. A tough battle seemed to be unable to avoid it. Kalan held the stone in his hand tightly, and his heart beat like a war drum, banging. The roar outside the valley was getting closer and closer, and the ground was shaking even harder, as if a giant beast was running towards them. He glanced at Ethelyn and saw that she was painting complicated runes on the ground with a wooden stick, her face as white as a piece of paper, but still as stable as a stone. He couldn't help swallowing and asked in a low voice, "What kind of purgatory is this? It's more difficult than those shadow puppets?" Atharine didn't raise her head, her voice as low as she was pulled out from the tooth. "The purgated beast is a monster that the purgated by the power of taboo. It is half a beast and half a demon, and has no brains. They only know how to destroy it. They are driven by his will, and they are specially used to kill threats like you." After painting the last rune, she stood up, and her eyes swept towards the entrance of the valley with a sharp look. "Don't waste, prepare. The power in your body just wakes up a little, try to use it, don't let me get tired of it. Kalan gritted his teeth. Although he was still in his heart, he also knew that it was not the time to retreat. He lowered his head and looked at the back of his hand. The flame pattern was as bright as a group of real fire, making his palms sweat. He took a deep breath and tried to recall the picture that had just been flashing in his brain when he closed his eyes, the huge figure standing in the sea of fire, and the burning spear. He didn't know what it was, but he could feel a heat flowing in his body, as if it was about to explode at any time. At this moment, the stone wall at the entrance of the valley suddenly exploded, and a large black shadow rushed in. The thing was 3 people tall, and it was covered with black pieces, as if soaked in ink. Its eyes were flashing with angry light, its mouth was smelly, saliva dripped, and its claws were as if it could tear the iron skin. As soon as it appeared, it made Kalan's ears buzzing and almost stood firm. That's it? Kalan's eyes widened, his voice trembling. The broken dagger on his waist was no different from the tooth tag in front of this monster, and he even wondered if he could break the skin of this guy. Ethelyn didn't give him a moment of silence. As soon as the wooden stick was slapped, the runes on the ground lit up instantly, and a light curtain rushed towards the purgatory like a net. The monster was slapped by the light curtain, and roared, and his claws slapped down hard. The light curtain was about to break a few holes, as if it was about to break at any time. Ethelyn bit her teeth tightly, and her head was covered in sweat. She shouted in a low voice, "Don't be stunned. Use your strength to attack its eyes." Kalan felt a tight heart. Although he didn't know how to use this so-called power, he still slammed his head and slammed it. He raised his hand holding the stone tablet, thinking about the flames in his brain, and growled in his mouth, "Come on, let me react." The next second, a heat suddenly burst out from the palm of his hand, turning into a fireball with a big fist, smashing straight towards the purple-blazed eyes. Although the fireball was not big, it was amazingly fast. The purgatory didn't have time to hide. The left eye was hit directly, and a painful roar came out, and the claws danced around, smashing the stones around it to pieces. Kalan looked at this scene and was stunned for a moment, then grinned, "Hey, it's done. I can really use this thing." "Don't be proud." Atharine's voice interrupted his excitement, "This is just the beginning, it doesn't fall so easily." Sure enough, the purgated beast shook his brain, and a more intense killing appeared in his red eyes, and he rushed towards Kalan, as fast as a breeze. Kalan was so excited that he rushed to the side and hurriedly hid, but the wind brought by his paws still made his face hurt. Asaline saw the situation, the wooden stick was slapped again, and another light curtain was placed in front of Kalan, holding the second shot of the purgated beast for him. But her face was even worse, and even a blood spurt came out of the corner of her mouth, which was obviously almost at its limit. Kalan got up and looked at her like this, feeling uncomfortable. He bit his teeth tightly, holding the stone tablet harder, and said in a low voice, "Old lady, hold on, I'll try again." He closed his eyes, and his brain flashed through the figure in the sea of fire. This time he did not resist the heat, but tried to guide it and let its arms gather in the palm of his hand. When he opened his eyes quietly, the stones in his hand were already wrapped in a group of blazing flames, as if he was holding a fire. He shouted loudly and rushed towards the purgated beast. The flames formed an arc with his movements, slashing directly on the monster's front paws. The purgated beast was hurt and roared, and a charred scar appeared on its paws, and the fishy smell spread out. It stepped back a few steps, staring at Kalan's eyes as if it finally became serious. Kalan gasped heavily. Although the flame in his hand was still there, it was obviously weaker. He could feel the power in his body as if he was being taken away, and even standing was a little bit of power. "This guy is so thick-skinned." He murmured in a low voice, glanced at Etherine, seeing her adjusting her breathing against the stone, and obviously she couldn't help anymore. His heart sank, knowing that if he drags on, both of them will be finished. So he gritted his teeth, decided to fight, and shouted at the bell, "Come on, ugly monster, if you have the ability, you can come." The Purgan seemed to have understood his pick, roared and rushed over again. Zhang Kai's bloody mouth went straight to Kalan's neck. Kalan's heartbeat was almost stopped, but he still forced himself to calm down. He flashed his body. Taking advantage of the moment when the monster was empty, the flames in his hands suddenly exploded, turning into a fire snake, slamming the purple beast's neck, making it his flesh and blood sneer. The monster was even more damaging, and his claws were terrifying, almost slapping the Kalan. But he held his arms tightly, and there was only one thought in his brain: you can't fall down, otherwise it would be over. Finally, under the continuous burning of the flames, the purgated beast slowed down, and a reluctant growl came out, and his big body fell to the ground, smashing a dust of soil. Kalan sat on the ground, panting like a dog. The stone in his hand fell aside, and the flames were extinguished. He was sweating all over his body, his clothes were torn to pieces by his claws, and there were still some clean blood marks on his body, but he grinned and said with a sound of "Hey, I've won. This broken monster is really not my opponent." Etheline walked over slowly. Although her face was still very bad, she had a little relief in her eyes. She looked at Kalan with her head down and said lightly, "It's great, the first time I can do this with the power of blood. You are more talented than I think. But this is just the beginning, the black purse will not be just one purse." She paused for a moment and replenished, "We have to leave here quickly, his breath has locked you." I clicked a little in Kalan. Although I was so tired that I wanted to lie down and sleep, I also knew that I couldn't stay here for a long time. He lifted the stone tablets, stood up and asked, "Then where are we going? Also, why is Ren? He won't be really fucked by those shadow disciples, right?" Atharine shook her head. "The people of the Blade family are not so easy to die. If he lives, he will come to us. Now, we have to go to the last myth, the Haven of Flameheart. That is where the Lord of Flameheart falls, and it is also the last block of the founding chapter. Only by gathering all the chapters can you truly control the power of blood and fight against the Black Pearl." Kalan felt a sank in his heart. Although he was still half believing and half doubting about these myths, the battle just now made him understand that nothing was just a joke. He gritted his teeth and pointed, "Okay, just go. But you have to tell me first, how can you find that place?" Etheline did not answer directly, but took out an old parchment scroll from her robe, painted with lines and runes that she couldn't understand. She pointed to one of the areas and said in a low voice, "This is a vast map. The Temple of Flameheart is at the northernmost end of Elsaris, deep in the ice field. It is guarded by the eternal wind and ordinary people cannot enter, but your blood can open the entrance. We have to go on the road, and there is not much time left." The two of them cleaned up briefly, left the Quartz Valley, and headed north. In the next few days, Kalan followed Etheline through the wilderness and forests, and escaped the pursuit of several waves of shadow men. Although the power of the flame in his body was not stable, it was easier to use than before, as if it was slowly adapting. He also became ill-treated in the days of running for life. Although he still loved to complain, he felt an unclear sense of responsibility in his heart. After nearly half a month of trekking, they finally arrived at the northernmost tip of Elsaris, a wasteland covered with ice. The wind shaves like a knife on his face. Kalan's broken cloak and teeth are shaving. He whispered, "This broken place is really not something that people can do. Why is there a trance here?" Atharine ignored his jail and just stopped and pointed to a giant stone door buried by ice and snow far away. The stone door is more than 10 meters high, and the surface is full of ancient runes. Although it is covered by ice layers, it is filled with a sense of power, making people dare not approach it. She said in a low voice, "That's it, the Palace of Flameheart. Your blood is the only key, try to wake it up." Kalan clicked his head, walked to the stone door, held the stone slab tightly, and closed his eyes. He tried to feel the heat flow in his body and let it gather in the palm of his hand. After a while, the flame pattern on the back of his hand lit up, and a red light shot out from his hand and hit the stone gate. The ice layer began to melt, a rune lighted up, and the stone door emitted a low sound of silence, opening slowly, revealing a dark passage leading to the ground. "It's done." Kalan opened his eyes quietly, with a little excited in his voice, but more of it was still tight. He turned to Etheline and asked, "Let's just go in here. Is there any trap inside?" Atharine clicked a little and said with great enthusiasm, the Palace of Flame Heart is the place where the Creator God is trying to find a place. There is indeed danger inside, but it is also the only way for you to become a true descendant of God. Let's go, I will accompany you. After speaking, she walked into the passage with a wooden stick first. Kaylin gritted her teeth and followed. The passage was so dark that I couldn't see my 5 fingers. Only the flame pattern on the back of Kaylin's hand emitted a faint light, barely illuminating the road under my feet. The air was so cold that it could hold back the blood, and the wall was filled with incomprehensible wall paintings, as if it was recording some ancient war. Kaylin walked around and looked, feeling bleak in his heart, and he always felt something was staring at them in secret. After about half a minute of leaving, a huge stone temple appeared in the passage. A burning sacrificial house stands in the center of the stone hall. Although the flames are weak, the heat emitted makes the entire hall warm. Behind the sacrificial stele is a huge stone tablet with dense runes engraved on it, like the last chapter of the founding. Kaylin was about to get closer when he suddenly heard a low smile coming from the depths of the stone hall, as if it had crawled out from the underground, making people creepy. He tightened his heart, held the stone slab tightly, and asked in a low voice, "Who is there? Come out." The laughter stopped and a tall black shadow walked out of the darkness. He was wearing a long black robe and a half-iron mask on his face. The exposed half of his face was as white as a dead person, and his eyes were filled with strange purple light. He held a twisted stick in his hand, scattering a suffocating pressure. Karan Starflame, descendant of the Lord of the Flame Heart. The black shadow's voice was low and sandy, carrying a slight mockery. "I have been waiting for you for a long time. I am Valdis Haging, the real master of this film." Kaylin's heart sank. Although he had never seen this guy, from the descriptions of Ren and Ethelyn, he had long guessed that this was the crazy person who wanted to destroy Elsaris. He bit his teeth tightly and said, "What are you waiting for me to fuck me? If you want to kill me, just say nothing, don't mess with these stupid people." Valdis sneered and raised his stud. The ground of the stone hall suddenly trembled, and several black fogs burst out from the ground and turned into a bulb, surrounding Kaylin and Ethelyn. He said in a low voice, "Kill you? No, I want your blood. The power of the Lord of the Flame Heart is the key to awakening the God of Destruction. Send your blood, or I will take it with you." Ethelyn's face changed, holding a wooden stick, and said to Kaylin in a low voice, "Don't listen to him, he has been corrupted by the force of taboos, and his reason has long been gone. Preparing for a fight is the last trial." Kaylin pointed a little, and although his heart was so tight that he knew that he could not avoid this battle. At this moment, a rapid sound of footsteps suddenly came from the entrance of the stone hall. Kaylin turned his head and found that it was Ren. He was injured and the old sword was covered in blood, but his eyes were still as sharp as a knife. He rushed into the stone hall, glanced at the scene, and said in a low voice, "Boy, I didn't expect you to be here. I'm late, but it's not over." Kaylin grinned, and her voice relaxed. "You are such a tough guy, just be fine if you don't die. Let's do this together." Ren pointed a little, stood beside Kaylin with a big sword, and Ethelyn began to chant the spell in a low voice, preparing for the final magic. Valdis looked at this scene and the mockery on his face became even more intense. "A bunch of slugs, want to resist fate? Okay, I'll let you see what real hope is." He raised his stud, and the black fog instantly roared, and the purgatory beasts roared and rushed towards the 3 of them. The battle in the stone hall started as soon as it touched. Kaylin held the stone slabs and the power of the flames in his body surged again. He knew that this battle was not only about his own life, but also about the future of the entire Elsaris. He gritted his teeth and growled, rushing towards the purgatory in front of him. The flames turned into a long spear in his hand, as if the Lord of the Fire Heart reappeared, and had his last fight with the darkness. The fire in the stone hall interacts with the black fog, and the sound of roar and metal collision is not absolutely right. The result of this battle will determine everything.